Hi everyone, Bryan Lewis from KidneyCAN again. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Facebook Live program in partnership with the National Kidney Foundation. Today we're going to be talking about getting back on the road to recovery after treatment. I'm pleased to be joined by two distinguished colleagues. First of all, Dr. Michael Atkins from Georgetown Lombardi Cancer Center.
Pleasure being here.
Thanks for being here. And also distinguished guest, Congressman Jim Hagedorn from the 1st District of Minnesota. Congressman
Thanks,
Hagedorn.
Brian. Good to be here.
Thank you for joining us. So let's dive right in. Dr. Atkins, tell us a little bit about when you see patients, they've just come to you, they may have been diagnosed already, and they're trying to figure out their life going forward. Can you give us a little bit of advice of what you tell your patients?
Sure. So I'm a medical oncologist, so I don't see every patient that gets diagnosed with kidney cancer. There are many patients who have small masses picked up incidentally on an imaging test done for another reason in their kidney that get sent to the urologist, and the urologist does surgery on them, and the risk of recurrence of disease spreading to distant parts of the body is very low, and then the urologist just follows them. But I'll see a patient if at the time of presentation there's already disease that's spread to distant parts of the body, or increasingly if they have a tumor that has high-risk features that puts them at risk for disease spreading to distant parts of the body. And our conversation is about staging their disease, where has it spread, what is their risk of it spreading if it hasn't already spread, and what treatment options are there for the disease, either to prevent it from spreading, and there's some new developments in that area, as well as if it's already spread, what are the best treatments. And it's been amazing to be in the kidney cancer research field over the past 16 years, because there's over a dozen new treatments that have been approved, and in the last 2 or 3 years we've been putting drugs together to form combinations, and the whole approach to treating kidney cancer has changed from back in maybe 2005 or so, where there was a 5% chance of curing patients with metastatic kidney cancer that is spread to distant parts of the body, to now we think that chance is as high as 30 to 40%, and it looks like over half of the patients are going to be alive at 4 to 5 years based on the recent studies.
Great. A lot of great news that's coming out of this field. So Congressman, let's turn to you and ask you, you were diagnosed incidentally out of the blue. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and tell us about how you got back after, started out and finished?
Yeah, I didn't have any symptoms. I just, was kind of rolling along, and my mother of all people said, you really need to get a physical. So I went in and saw my doctor, and before you know it, on February 15th, 2019, I'll never forget the day, he called and told me that I had a large mass on my right kidney, and had to put me on a path. I didn't know what that meant exactly, but I found out very quickly that it meant we go find the best medical professionals in the world in order to try to treat that and figure out the type of treatment or surgery that we would go forward to. I happen to represent the Mayo Clinic in southern Minnesota, so I'm very fortunate to have some of the finest physicians and people in the world who have done work in this very field to help me out. And I just say to people, once you find out there's a problem, you fight cancer every day. It doesn't really matter what stage you are or what position they tell you, whether you still have it or don't have it, you still fight cancer every day. And there is a lot of hope, as the doctor said. Incredible treatments that didn't exist 2 or 3 years before I was told I had cancer are the ones that's saving my life today.
Great. So I heard the word path there, so I want to ask Dr. Atkins, we talk about our kidney cancer journey or our path, so you must advise a lot of patients about their path. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. First thing is, a lot of patients, when they hear that they have cancer, they want to have surgery right away or do something right away because they can't sleep at night knowing they have this diagnosis, and they go somewhere and they get an opinion and they do that. And my advice to patients is it's much better to do the right thing than the fast thing when it comes to cancer. Those tumors like kidney cancer has probably been there. Congressman, your cancer may have been there for a decade before it was discovered. So waiting an extra week or 2 or 3 to try to make sure you have a treatment plan rather than a treatment makes a lot of sense. And many times that's coordinating between doctors, urologists coordinating with a medical oncologist, for example. And many times that coordinated care from experts is best delivered at places like Mayo Clinic or at Georgetown, which are NCI designated comprehensive cancer centers.
Got it, got it. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about your path then, Congressman. So you were diagnosed at the Mayo, or somewhere else, and then went to the Mayo Clinic.
Oh, yeah, one of my primary physicians found the cancer, and then I went to Mayo and met with folks. I think in the United States we're very blessed to have incredible high-quality medicine all across the country, many institutions, as the doctor said, that can help people with serious disease like cancer. And in my case, the tumor board met, and they decided that we wouldn't go to surgery, that we'd try this kind of emerging treatment, frontline treatment, where you take a pill, Exhibitive. How do you pronounce that, doctor, exactly?
Axitinib.
There you go. I should know that after all this time. I take that twice a day, and then I get an infusion of immunotherapy called Keytruda every 6 weeks. We started that pretty quickly. I'm still on it today. Along the course of my treatment, they took out my kidney, and surgeon, Dr. Thompson in Mayo, said it was a success, and my other oncology doctor, Dr. Pagliaro, said that right now no cancer detected. So doesn't mean we're cured. I'm still in treatment. We're just going to, like I said, you just keep fighting.
Yeah, and I heard a little bit of a hint that you might have gotten back here to D.C. quickly after your diagnosis and recovery. Is that true?
Oh, well, they took my kidney out right at the end of the year in 2020, and 6 days later I was on the House floor to vote. So we had a little bit of a quick recovery, but yes. I had some doctors tell me that probably wasn't too smart, but what the heck.
Hey, well, that gives encouragement and hope to folks that are listening. So, Dr. Atkins, I just wanted to come back a little bit to this idea of the pathway and going forward with that pathway. So you see patients, do you talk to them about lengths of time and scans and follow-up and what they should be expecting ahead of them, or how do you get into those issues?
Well, in a conversation with a patient, it's usually best to have, and it's sometimes been difficult during the pandemic, to have more than 2 sets of ears in the room so that they can listen to what I'm saying, because oftentimes the patient can't take in all the information because they're anxious or they're worried. And so it's good to come in with your spouse or a family member or a close friend who can also listen. Fine to record things if you want, just so you can go back to the conversation. But what I try to do in layman's terms is lay out the diagnosis, what it means, the treatment options, and what's involved with those treatments in terms of treatment regimens, what side effects might happen, and for how long, and what the anticipated outcomes might be of those treatments, and then give them a chance to ask questions and then make a recommendation for what I think would be best for them, and then give them a chance to comment on that. Many times, our primary approach at an academic medical center is to propose a research trial, because all of the new treatments that I talked about in the beginning that have been approved over the last 15 years all came out of research studies. And there's still plenty unanswered questions where we can move things forward with research studies. So at academic medical centers, we have access to drugs before they become FDA approved that may be the treatments of tomorrow. Sometimes if a patient is eligible for one of those promising approaches, we'll discuss that with them. And then we'll give them some time to digest all of that, encourage them to seek a second opinion, give them names to go see where they can get reliable second opinions, and then ultimately, if they choose to come back to us, we'll start the therapy and follow them very regularly.
Got it. So, Congressman, I just want to highlight something Dr. Atkins said, which is around coordinating your care. We talk a lot about a care team, and we talk about family or friends being there with you to hear everything. I layer in that there's a whole nother language you have to learn around cancer. So can you reflect on your care and your care team and shared decision making as you moved into this new world?
Well, first of all, I think we're very fortunate in the United States to have so many, especially with NIH and then the private companies that are out there developing these treatments, state-of-the-art ways in order to help people live the best lives possible and the longest lives possible. And every day, as the doctor says, more and more of these incredible innovations are hitting the market. So there's a lot of hope for folks out there. But really, your family, my wife Jennifer, my family, my friends, staff, and then total strangers become your caregivers along with your doctors and others. And it's amazing how people, and I think the folks out there would recognize, people rally around you.
Yeah.
They show up out of nowhere.
Right.
And the prayers do help.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, Dr. Atkins, tell the folks here, what does a care team sort of look like? I have my view of what a care team. I'm curious what you all think professionally a care team should look like.
Well, I think there's two teams. One is the team that manages the care, which it should be more than one doctor in many cases. At my clinic, just in the medical oncology clinic, there's me, there's a nurse practitioner, there's a nurse coordinator, there are research nurses, there are data managers, there are fellows, there are sometimes residents, and they're all participate in some way in the helping the patient and their family deal with the illness. I should also mention dietitians, social workers, et cetera, that all come into play and have particular roles. And then there's a multidisciplinary caregiving team, which might include urologists, radiation oncologists, radiologists, pathologists, that are the people who meet at a tumor board like you described to try to come up with a treatment plan for a particular patient, and then will execute that treatment plan, the steps of it that involve their expertise once it comes out of the tumor board. But there's also a care team that the patient has around them that the Congressman was talking about, which are people who you can rely on to help you when you're not feeling well, and to come with you to clinic appointments, to help ask good questions, and to help you make decisions, and then people who can make sure that you're not alone if you're living away from home, like you might be, sir, and sometimes send meals for you and things like that. So there are many ways in which a care team can help a patient through this, and some of the kidney cancer associations also can perform that function.
Yeah, I appreciate what these folks are doing for for people with kidney cancer. It's like you said, maybe the most important thing is just understanding what you're going through. People are there for you and they kind of understand what you have to deal with. But in my case, the professionals at the Mayo Clinic have just been fantastic.
Great, great. So it sounds like the definition of a care team might be individualized for each case, but it can incorporate a number of different types of care providers, including your family as well as, do you see at Georgetown and other institutions that the patient is involved with those care teams on a sort of regular basis, or are they removed from the decision-making process?
The decisions are always the patient's. It's our job to provide the patients with information, and it's their job to provide us with information if their situation changes. So many of the new drugs that have been discovered and the current treatments for kidney cancer have side effects. And although the side effects can usually be tolerated and well managed, they're much better managed if the doctor or the care team at the hospital knows about them early and can make the appropriate adjustments. And so we're always encouraging our patients to contact us with questions. And we have people who are sort of part of our team who are on the front line to answer those questions that patients know they can reach at a moment's notice.
Good, good. So you mentioned at the outset, clinical trials are right at the forefront. And I want to sort of tie this into the recent COVID situation and Operation Warp Speed, if we can. There was a lot learned through the Operation Warp Speed and delivering a vaccine. My understanding is there was a lot of research prior to that that led to the fast pace of the Operation Warp Speed. Are there things from the clinical trial world that we can take now to apply going forward with kidney cancer research and diagnosis and treatment?
So first of all, I think Operation Warp Speed was wonderful, but what was really fortunate was the fact that we had this RNA technology which was being developed at a time when this pandemic came around. It was being developed for vaccines, but also vaccines and cancer. Having those companies ready and poised to be able to switch or pivot and use that technology to develop a vaccine was really fortunate. But with regard to what we learned during the pandemic, where our research had to change, is that we now can use more commonly remote consenting through e-consent forms for our patients. We feel more comfortable using telehealth visits for some of our patients on trials. We feel like we can contribute or manage people who are on clinical trials even if we're not seeing them in person. And I think that's going to change the way trials are designed and hopefully expedite the development of new therapies.
Well, that's a great point, and I want to ask Congressman, you come from a rural district, southern Minnesota, a lot of farming. Telehealth is now a new phenomenon. I'm curious to hear your advice or thoughts or reflections on this pandemic and telehealth and your situation.
Kind of pushed the whole medical community in there from offering it, all the way from the big hospitals to the clinics to the VA and everybody else. And the folks I know in our rural district really appreciate it. We need to make sure we have the broadband connection so they can sometimes transfer information properly and have that connection. But yeah, it's been good, and it's great for folks who happen to be a little older and maybe it's tougher to get around, or when we have inclement weather, or when maybe even your doctor has to be away on a conference teaching other doctors things, and you can still check in and do the work. So I think it's
no inclement weather in Minnesota.
well, not this month anyway.
So as far as you think telehealth is here to stay and
that was one of the good things that came about this whole pandemic, is that it really moved that ahead. And I think in Congress we all pretty much agree that the reimbursement should be there for that. It should be something that we promote. I also think that maybe some of the FDA regulations along the way, they've seen that perhaps they can do things a little quicker and do them in ways that are still safe, and move some of these treatments along for the American people. I don't know what you think, Doc.
I agree. I think the FDA has, I think, loosened up a little bit, not necessarily their criteria, but how quickly they work, and use this emergency use authorizations and accelerated approvals more frequently when it looks like it's important to have the drugs available, and then we'll go back for full approval once more data is available. So, but when it looks like things are promising and necessary, whether it's in the cancer field or in the part of the pandemic, those type of approvals have happened and have brought treatments to patients sooner than they otherwise might have been available.
I'm going to touch on something for you, Congressman, that Dr. Atkins mentioned, which was the technology was there for mRNA and into vaccines, and so that's medical research. Mm-hmm. And I know that you're a supporter of medical research. KidneyCAN is, we all are. So can you tell us a little bit about some of the efforts that you see behind pursuing further medical research going forward?
I mean, obviously you need funding, appropriations to do these things. I think the National Institute of Health doing the basic research. Some of that research is performed in my district. I think the doctor told me that even on some of these cancer therapies for kidney cancer, some of that research was done there. So that's terrific. But I think we also need to make sure that we have a system in place in our country where we do not deter the advancement of cures. And so, some of these policies where they want to tax and regulate, I'd be careful, because even the Congressional Budget Office has said you could have upwards of 100 cures that wouldn't be available over the next decade if some of the legislation before Congress were to pass. And you can't put a price tag on it. I tell people that The most expensive drug treatment out there is the one that costs zero, because it means it's not available, and it means that you're not going to have hope for that patient. And how do you put a price tag on that? We have to keep innovating and keep promoting as best we can to, like I said, give everybody the best and longest life possible.
Yeah, and I think that's an important word that you use, which is hope. And I think on behalf of all of the community, we all look for different types of hope, and we're impressed by the bounce back recovery you've had, and willingness to get back and roll up your sleeves and go to work. So thank you on behalf of
we're all cancer survivors. Yeah. That's the main thing, and we'll keep fighting.
Well, great. So let's shift a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about clinical trials for a second. That's such an integral part of any treatment coming to the patient in the long term. And I'm curious, did you have any opportunities from your doctors to look at clinical trials, or did they just sort of give you a path that you?
No, I mean, I think the choice was either they were going to go in and do some very major surgery at the time, or they were going to try one of these new treatments, or a treatment that had been around a little while. But I think the doctor can attest that even just a few years ago, there weren't too many options for people who had advanced kidney cancer like I did.
And I know that clinical trials, there's a challenge to try to get access to a diverse number of patients out there. Can you give any insights on what Georgetown or other institutions are trying to do to try to get the recruitment of clinical trials to be as diverse as possible?
Sure, that's a major priority for the National Cancer Institute, and therefore a major priority for National Cancer Institute designated cancer centers. And the NCI wants the research population on clinical trials at cancer centers to represent the demographics of the catchment area for that cancer center. So we, in DC, where I work, there's a huge minority population, and they don't always come to our hospital. So we've partnered with Washington Hospital Center as part of our cancer center, and we share clinical trials with the MedStar sister institution across town, so that patients can go on similar trials at Washington Hospital Center without having to come to Georgetown. We also have done things like facilitating rides for patients on clinical trials to Georgetown if the trial is only here, through contracts with Uber, or through the city of DC has some funds available to support that type of activity. And we have a lot of social support services going on to help patients who may not be able to afford to take extra days off of work that would require them to be required for a clinical trial. And so we can provide some sort of assistance to them so they can come in for those extra visits that might be part of a clinical trial. But these are all things we're working on. We haven't got there yet. And we also want to be out in the community talking about research and how important it is to improving health care.
Thank you. So, what I'd like to do now is, for folks watching, we're going to take some questions, and I see one has come in right now. If we do run out of time, these questions will be answered on the National Kidney Foundation's Facebook page, as well as KidneyCAN's. So, Congressman, I want to ask you, in your road to recovery, or as you continue on your road, are there any habits, healthy ideas, any special instructions for the public?
My doctor told me to do everything in moderation, and I'm taking him up on that. So I don't know. I think obviously when you have a serious illness, you start looking and reflecting, maybe try to eat a little better, and cut out some things that would be in excess from time to time. The main thing is that when you get tired, you need to rest. When you're not feeling well, you need to kind of deal with it. And as the doctor said, you can't let things go too long, because if you do, then they'll become even bigger and bigger side effects. You're right to mention that the side effects for some of these new treatments, like immunotherapy, are not the same as the old traditional chemotherapy. I tell people, for instance, you don't lose your hair. And then they tell me, well, you better check the data on that, Hagedorn. But other than that, you can get sick, you can get tired, You can have other things that affect you. But by and large, not too bad when it gives you such promise. And like we say, hope and opportunity.
Yeah, and moderation, that's always is a key phrase. I got to ask you, Dr. Atkins, there was some breaking news last week at the big ASCO conference regarding what's called adjuvant therapy, which I still didn't understand for 2 years after being diagnosed. So can you tell us a little bit about the word adjuvant and then how this news is playing out?
Sure. So adjuvant means a treatment after surgery, after definitive treatment, where there's no evidence of disease visible on imaging, but there's a high risk of disease coming back based on how factors the staging of the original cancer. And so adjuvant treatment is something to give to reduce that risk of coming back. And most of the people would know of that in the context of breast cancer, where a lot of the chemotherapy that people get for breast cancer after surgery is given in the adjuvant setting to prevent breast cancer recurrence rather than to treat already visible recurrence. And at our national meeting, there's really no reliable FDA-approved adjuvant treatment for patients who have high-risk kidney cancer resected. So there have been a lot of research studies in this space. All of them have been negative. All except one has been negative, and the one that was positive was inconsistent with other trials using that same drug, and so no one tended to use that treatment either. But in the last 3 or 4 years, there have been trials using these new drugs to see whether they work in the absence of disease that's visible to try to prevent relapse. The results of the first of those studies reduced the risk of relapse in patients with high-risk kidney cancer by around 1/3 and seemed to prevent, although it was very early, death from kidney cancer by 50%. So that's a big deal. That means patients with high-risk kidney cancer who get that resected by their urologist should now be seeing a medical oncologist and getting a year of this therapy. And there are other trials coming along that are looking at different immunotherapies in this space, which may or may not work as well as pembrolizumab. But clearly, immune therapy is not just a treatment for people with visible disease, but even people who have disease that you can't see can have that eradicated with immune therapy.
Well, thank you. We're starting to run out of time, but I want to ask the Congressman one more question. So on your road, we all know we're not supposed to smoke, and we're supposed to eat healthy and exercise and all those things I hope we're all doing. What other advice can you give to those, maybe the newly diagnosed patient or the patient who's out there wondering, how did he do so well? What can I be doing?
I think if folks look at it like every day is a gift and go out there and take it on, and yeah, you're going to have to fight through some things, but man, there's a lot of hope and opportunity out there, and there's the cures, what the doctor's just talking about now, coming around the corner, and ways that they know how to treat folks and keep them living even longer and better lives. I mean, I think that's the main thing, and I think people will be shocked and surprised how many people rally to be at their side.
Great. So Dr. Atkins, we got to hear the medical perspective on this. Any advice for the patient community out there on this?
Well, first of all, we have good treatment, so I tell patients most of all to rely on their treatments, to make sure they take the treatments, and if they're having problems, to contact the doctors. Or their healthcare team. That's the most important message. But things that they can do independently to help them tolerate the therapy better are to avoid smoking, reduce alcohol, because there's a lot of the treatments have some side effects on the liver that could be made worse by alcohol. To try to eat a balanced diet. Now is not the time to start some crazy new diet. Try to eat food that you like, because maintaining your strength and your energy and your weight is important. And this is not the time to start a new exercise routine. You're already doing a lot of work to try to get your cancer controlled. So focus on making sure that you can get the treatment and stay on the treatment rather than you have, hopefully if the disease goes away, you'll have plenty of time to get your muscle mass back and get back to maybe in better shape. But best first to get the cancer gone.
So I just want to follow up with one point, and I'd love to hear both your perspectives. So there's new research starting to come out around patient-reported outcomes, where patients get to write down what's happening to them on a daily or weekly basis, sometimes electronically. And there's some research that's coming out saying that when patients are engaged, their outcomes are better. Would you have any thoughts on that? I know it's not...
It's an early field. There's a lot of great work, but nothing definitive. But it's made possible by things like Apple Watches and these wearables that can keep track of what your pulse is and your heart rhythm is and how many steps you're taking, and also sophisticated questionnaires that can look into various aspects of well-being that are being linked to clinical trials, and then trying to see whether there's certain ways in which that information can provide better information than what the doctor can provide about the quality of life for patients who are undergoing particular therapies.
Congressman, any thoughts on that?
So it just might be peace of mind. I mean, even some of these emerging therapies which don't have quite the side effects as the previous, like chemotherapy, it still can elevate your blood pressure, change your thyroid function, and then people don't know exactly what's happening, but if they're monitoring that, I think they feel better about their condition. My doctors have kind of told me, though, how you feel is probably how you're doing, and a lot of that is up here, and some of it is just the medicine working.
Right,
so.
right. Great. Well, thank you both. Really appreciate your time today. I just want to say thank you to all those who've tuned in today. As I mentioned before, all of the questions and answers should be on our Facebook pages. If you have any more, please send them in. We really appreciate the sponsors who've helped us today to broadcast this, so thank you. And just want to again say thank you, Dr. Atkins, for being here.
My pleasure.
And Congressman, really appreciate your time.
Nice job, Bryan.
Thank you. And for all of those out there watching, appreciate you tuning in. We wish you all the best health going forward. Thank you.